What's up, witches? My name is Syzygy and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then hi, hello, nice to have you. I realized that it's been a long while since I did a classic story time, and because the majority of you all voted for it, that's what we're going to do today. Before we get into everything though, I have a little bit of an announcement. If you guys are fans of Unnamed World, aka my OCs, then you'll want to hear this, perhaps, maybe. I've decided to start up a fun little Tumblr Ask blog for Vincent, Adrienne, Valentine at ask-val.tumblr.com. You can just send in some questions, whether anonymously or with your regular account, and I can answer them as Vince. I've just been having so much fun LARPing as him. Since I initially announced the Ask blog on my community tab, I have gotten quite a bit of interaction, so like I promised, I will be starting up some more Ask blogs for some of my other OCs like Arthur, Felix, and Freddy pretty soon, so stay tuned for those ones. I'll be making them when I have the time to make a lot of art for it. So yeah, if you're interested, go to ask-val.tumblr.com or follow the link in the description, and stay tuned to my community tab if you want to know when the other blogs go up. Thank you so much, and back to your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, so growing up, I've never really been involved very much with my extended family. I know that there's a lot of people that know like their second cousins twice removed as well as they would a sibling, but in my home we were never super involved with anyone outside of our immediate family, that being the people that we lived with. We went to a few of the family reunion type things over the years, but never really kept in touch. Part of this is because my mom, my uncle, and the aunt that I will be discussing today were all adopted by my grandmother, and aren't actually related to the rest of the family that would be at those family reunions. And by extension, neither me or my siblings are related either. Outside of the immediate family that we lived with, though, the only other person that we saw regularly was limited to pretty much just my grandmother, who me and my sister religiously visited like every other week. We loved staying with her. Other than her, the only other person that we ever saw even slightly as often was my Aunt B, who we didn't visit regularly, but because she lived in the same county as my grandma and my family, we just kind of went over there probably at least every couple of weeks. And this Aunt B, and my time spent with her, is the subject of today's video. Now, I was originally going to make this video about Aunt B herself, but after thinking about it for a bit, I realized that I kind of wanted to talk more about the specific time that we spent together, so here's a real short background summary of Aunt B just for convenience's sake. Aunt B was always an aloof, spiteful knob to pretty much our entire family, but especially towards my mother. The two of them always fought and never really got along as kids, and apparently Aunt B could not let that past sibling rivalry go, because she was always super passive-aggressive towards my mum whenever we visited. However, even in spite of her clearly not really liking my mum and just our family in general, she would always, invite us to things, even though she didn't have to. Mostly holiday parties and get-togethers in which there would always be other random extended family members and then some of Aunt B's weird friends there as well. As much as I could drone on about how terrible these holiday parties always were, there was this one on New Year's a long time ago in which I got into a fist fight with some kid. What is actually juicy is how she would treat me, and I guess my sister, but that's later in the video as well. For some reason, Aunt B always wanted kids. She would always sort of parade about and brag about how she would be some amazing mother, but she was honestly really terrible with kids, so bad, including myself. When I was really young, I actually used to enjoy coming over to her house and doing sleepovers with her. The reason why was because, unlike my family, she was actually pretty well off. Well, I mean, she was in a ton of debt because she spent millions on building a house, but her house was nice, and she would always just buy me things that my parents couldn't afford. Her credit card debt was probably pretty bad in retrospect. Essentially, she spoiled me, and that's why I liked her. She liked to dress me up and do my makeup like a doll. As I started getting older, though, and became more of my own person and becoming more independent and self-determined, she always started to get weirdly aggressive with me. If I didn't want to do something that she wanted to do, she would get weirdly butthurt about it. Plus, she could never fathom the fact that I aged over 5 years old because she patronized me like nothing else. One thing to know about me, that you probably already do know if you know me, is that my least favorite thing is to be patronized, talked down to, or infantilized. I just hate it so much. This was the thing that I hated even as a 3-year-old, like really a lot, which sucked because when you're an autistic kid with behavioral issues who happens to be a small child, you're going to be infantilized. It's just kind of how things are, unfortunately. However, how much I hate talking down to children in general is a nerd rage-induced rant for another day. Basically, what is relevant is that Aunt B could not fathom that, even as a kid, I was my own person, had my own opinions, and could make my own decisions about certain things. At the same time, she would often do this thing where she would flip over into thinking my small child self should basically be an adult, in the sense that she would get upset with me when I didn't act mature enough or made, like, very minor little mistakes. So it would go from pinching my little cheek and calling me her little booby bear or whatever, to yelling at me because I put my elbow on the table. She was like almost 40 when I was a little kid and got weirdly mad at me when I didn't like or want to do the things that she liked or wanted to do. This was exemplified no better than, just as the title suggests, on our trips. You see, Aunt B worked for a phone book company, and she would often have to travel around Washington and sometimes Oregon to meet with her clients. Often she would stay in a particular area for a couple of weeks to do her job, and then would move on somewhere else. This was actually pretty cool to me as a first grader because, well, my family doesn't travel. None of us like road trips, for one. In fact, if we're in the car too long together, we're probably almost near strangling each other. But besides that, I've never really been on a plane because, like I said before, I come from a pretty poor family, and we didn't and still do not have the money to travel anywhere. So when one year at the end of first grade, me being only a couple of weeks from turning 8 years old, when my aunt asked if I'd like to leave Washington for the first time and stay with her in Oregon for a couple of weeks, I jumped on that opportunity so fast, and this is both the first and only time I've ever been out of state. We packed a suitcase for me, and that same day that she asked, I was driven for 6 hours to Oregon. Now, overall, most of the trip was like medium traumatizing to my almost 8-year-old ass. Don't worry, we will get there. We got to this pretty decent hotel, and from there things grew weary really fucking fast. Throughout the 2 weeks that I stayed with her, she constantly wanted to take me out places. At first it wasn't so bad, but when it was every day that we went to a new restaurant, a new store, and a new museum, it was pretty exhausting. Again, I was a little autistic kid with social anxiety who never traveled and never went outside. So you can probably imagine that my social battery drained quick. I kind of grinned and bore it for the first week and a half because I didn't want to upset her, though. Finally, towards the end of our trip, when she asked to take me to the mall and it was like 8 p.m., I put my foot down and I said no because I was tired, and had already been to the mall with her earlier that week. When I was just like, no, I don't really want to go, she acted like I killed her dog or something. When I said no, instead of just being like, okay, we can take a break for tonight, she lost it and started kind of guilt-tripping me. I remember her saying shit like, I did all of this stuff for you and you don't even appreciate it. I was gonna take you to a salon tomorrow to get a manicure and maybe get a massage, but you just had to go and be bad and lose your trip privileges. Ugh, I had this surprise all planned out. And for the next couple of days, she didn't take me anywhere, citing that I had been quote-unquote bad and selfish and had talked back to her, and me not getting to go to this salon was the quote-unquote punishment for that. At the end of the trip, though, my parents and 2 siblings surprised me by showing up at the hotel, and then they took me to Seaside, Oregon for 4 days, where we stayed in the hotel for my birthday. That was pretty cool. I actually have some good memories from that time. But now, back to when I was in Oregon. On to the traumatizing part of that trip. So remember when I mentioned that Aunt B worked for a phone book company and traveled specifically because she needed to meet with clients? Well, I wasn't actually told about this before we made it to Oregon. We got to the hotel and then I was told that she would be out to meet with a lot of clients during the 2 weeks we were going to be there. My almost 8-year-old ass had never been home alone, much less alone in a hotel away from home and outside of my home state. And when I was a kid, I didn't have a cell phone. It was like 2012, and I never got my first phone until I was in my freshman year of high school, I think. So when she wasn't chauffeuring me around aggressively to all these different places, I was in the hotel alone for hours at a time, unable to contact her or my parents if anything happened. At first, I didn't really care all that much. I usually just sat in the hotel bed and watched Back to the Barnyard or something on TV. However, things started to get really upsetting when she would give me time estimates for when she would be back and then go go over that time she indicated by a lot. The worst time, and the time I freaked out the most, was when she said she'd be gone for an hour and a half and then disappeared for 3 whole hours during that Oregon trip. When I got home and told my mom about how much time I spent alone in a foreign state with no way to call anyone if I needed help, she was pretty livid and apparently talked to Aunt B about that. Ironically, I was later told that she apparently said to my mother that it wasn't a big deal and that she was a great caretaker and I was making a mountain out of a molehill. In my opinion, she was a hella egotist. Woman could not fathom that she had treated me pretty poorly and had been irresponsible. The following year, though, during spring break, Aunt B asked me if I'd like to go on another trip with her. I said no at first, pretty afraid that she'd leave me alone for a long time again, but then she assured me and promised me that she wouldn't. And because this trip was still in Washington, my home state, and was only supposed to last a few days, I reluctantly agreed, naively thinking it would be nice to get out of the house. Turns out she totally lied to me about her not leaving. When I got to the place she was staying, it was one of her friends' houses. The first 2-ish days were pretty normal. We went to a couple of places and Aunt B's friends, this married couple, were, I guess, alright, I don't know. Things changed though when day 3 rolled around, and this is by far the most traumatizing experience that I've ever had staying with Aunt B. One morning I woke up and the house was completely empty. Aunt B's friends were out of the house, I'm not sure where necessarily, and Aunt B herself was nowhere to be found. She left me a note on the kitchen table saying that she'd be back sometime around 11 a.m. Well, I woke up a bit late, so it was only a bit less than an hour before she should have been back. Next thing you know, 3 p.m. starts to roll around and I start to panic. I tried to call my mom, but the landline in their house was not working for some reason. I watched both movies that Aunt B left for me, and now there was nothing to do but be anxious about where she was. I was so freaked out, I not only tried that landline, but 2 others around their house. Even going into an office I was told not to go into. But none of them worked. I wanted to call my mom and hear her voice, because the house was dead silent and my aunt was now 4 hours late to being home when she said she'd be. I can't remember the time exactly when I made this decision, but it was probably almost 4 p.m. when I left the house and ran across the street to ask a neighbor if they had a cell phone I could use, as the landlines were either not working or maybe more likely I just didn't know how to use them. This mother and her daughter answered the door, and just as the mother was consoling me and the daughter was handing me her cell phone, that is when Aunt B turned the corner and parked. In tears, I remember running across the street to her and hugging her when she got out of the car, and what did I get in response? I got scolded for going over to the neighbor's house unsupervised. Like, bro, as if you weren't the one to leave me unsupervised in a house with phones I didn't know how to use. After this, I asked her to take me back home, and the trip ended early. Just want to say that this experience traumatized me so badly that I ended up with intense separation anxiety for years afterwards. I was like 15 and would still get knots in my stomach and freak out if my mom left me home to go shopping. Shopping! Not even on trips! Like, dude, it has been only in the last 3 years that I've been able to be home alone without flipping my fucking shit. That's how bad this affected me. Now, I believe that she did apologize to me for this experience later, I think through my mom, but honestly, I don't really ever think she meant it. She was like super dismissive. After this experience, I only went on a total of 2 more trips with her. The first was later that summer, in which we went to Ocean Shores, Washington. This one was actually pretty fun and nothing bad happened, so that trip went well. Would recommend a trip there if you haven't been and you're on the West Coast at some point. I think the only incident between us occurred again when I didn't want to go somewhere with her or something and she made a big deal out of it like usual. The final trip happened 1 year later during spring break of 2014 if I remember correctly, when my aunt took me and my sister to Olympia. You see, I only agreed to go on a longer trip with her again if my sister was with me, just because of the separation anxiety from before. Now, it turned out that I actually didn't need my sister because Aunt B stayed with us pretty much the whole time this time, but I'm still glad he came because God did he make the trip easier to bear. I was able to talk to him about whatever our cringy asses were interested in at the time, so it wasn't as boring overall. There were only really 2 notable bra moments that happened during this trip. The first was the quote-unquote educational aspect. You see, Aunt B, as usual, toted us both around Olympia aggressively. We spent hours just sort of walking around at a time, and I remember one of the things that we did was to go see the Capitol building. Yes, Olympia is our state capital, not Seattle. I know it seems like it should be Seattle, but it isn't. Aunt B would stop and force us to read every single plaque, and it was excruciating. Definitely not what two kids wanted to be doing, especially not on a vacation. We slogged through several days of being dragged around to different places until around came Thursday, the day before we were supposed to go home. Now, keep in mind, my sister and I are almost 8 and 10 respectively. Aunt B decided that it would be a great idea to take us to the hands-on children's museum there in Olympia. Now, I googled it to try and find out what their age demographic is, and Google claims it's from birth up to 10, but like, let's be honest here, no kid over 6 or 7 is going to enjoy this place. This was especially the case for me and my sister. We were much more interested in sitting at home and drawing on sketch pads than going to any children's museum. Aunt B actually said it was a surprise when she first got us in the car, and I remember us hoping that it would be like a restaurant or like a salon, but no. We got there and it was a play place for babies, pretty much. Now, I don't remember much about the children's museum. Apparently the experience was either so boring or so traumatizing that I completely blocked out most of it. I just have 2 specific memories. The first one was when we came in. I remember the first place that we went to was like this fake kitchen thing. It had fake ovens and stovetops and fake plastic food. Why I remember it so readily was because there were mascots. Now, no idea if it's a phobia, but something about mascots just freaks me out. It's why a furry convention would be a special breed of hell for me. Not a judger, I'm just terrified of mascots, guys. So when we walked into this kitchen, and there was this man in a creepy rabbit fursuit, and he and this other guy in a bear fursuit were doing loud, funny voices while acting out a cooking skit for the kids, I wanted to leave immediately. A piece of my soul died that day, and I don't have a lot of soul to spare. I actually looked up the museum to try and find a picture, and I fucking did! This is the exact kitchen where that horror took place. Freaky. I also asked my sister if he remembered the rabbit man and then sent him this image. Safe to say, he was also not having fun when we were there. We couldn't just turn around and leave because I knew my aunt would be pissed if we tried, so my sister and I just sort of hustled to the next exhibit together. I think that this was like a big climb up to a bird's nest or something. It was kind of modeled like a tree. This is the second and only other memory I have of the place. My sister and I got up to the top of the bird's nest, looked each other in the eyes, and we said, "I hate it here. You too?" Yeah, and the 2 of us there agreed to pretend that we were having fun so that Aunt B wouldn't be upset with us. So for the rest of the time we were there, we just kind of put up with it until we finally got to go back to where we were staying, and everything should have been completely fine. We should have gone to bed, should have woken up the next morning, then we should have gone right back home. It should have been fine, it should have been easy. And yet, the next morning, disaster struck. Early in the morning, we were packing up our things so that Aunt B would drive us home pretty soon. I remember having to use the bathroom before we left, so I went in to do that. And when I was done, I got up and tried to flush, and the toilet didn't work. I have absolutely no idea what I did or what happened to that toilet, but all of a sudden, it just wasn't flushing. Now, I was terrified. I was pretty sure that if I had tried to tell Aunt B about it, she would think that I broke it or something and get super mad. So I just didn't say anything. That was my 2 million IQ strat, I guess. Obviously, that didn't work out, and I got found out immediately, because when my aunt went in there, she quickly realized that it wasn't flushing and that I had been the one in there before her. As predicted, the Fire Nation attacked. I got yelled at for a solid 30 minutes, and every time I tried to tell her that I didn't do anything to break it and it was an accident, she didn't listen. It was like she thought I did it on purpose. I remember being in tears and my sister just standing off to the side like the person standing emoji. You know the one. The entire hour and a half long, or however long it was, drive back home was just her seething about me and my sister being terrible and horrible and about how we didn't deserve the Children's Museum surprise. And all I really wanted to say in response to that was, yeah, bitch, I didn't deserve being traumatized by mascots. But I held my tongue because I knew that that would just make things way worse. And yeah, that was my last trip ever with my aunt. Since then, Aunt B has asked my sister and I to visit a couple more times, but we never made that same mistake again. Since then, she moved away from my county and sold her house, so we have an extra excuse not to talk to her now that she isn't in close proximity. You know, gotta look at the silver linings. Anyways, while we're here, I also want to take the moment to clarify that the people that I talk about in my storytime videos, I don't think that they're evil, ghoulish demons or something. I oftentimes get aggressive or dramatic for the sake of comedy and entertainment value, but a lot of people in the past have seemed to think that I'm, like, actually that hateful towards the people that I talk about from my past. No. Do I think that my Aunt B is an evil, terrible person who needs to be dragged away by the ankles and locked up in the gulag? No. But was she terrible to me a lot, and did she give me an intense separation anxiety trauma that lasted for, like, more than half a decade? Yeah. And I feel compelled to nerd rage about it in a boring YouTube video, so here we are. LMAO. Alright, with all of that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it entertaining or interesting. If you have your own horror stories about aunts or, I don't know, other similar things, feel free to leave a comment down below to express them there. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to rate and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you want to see some more of my artwork, safe for work and not safe for work, 18+ for that last one, follow the link to the card down below. There you can find links to all my socials. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and don't forget to stay magical.